This is a collection of disturbing, true horror stories that happened on the 4th of July. The last story is simultaneously tragic and infuriating. No matter how wholesome the setting or the holiday, some degenerate is always keen to destroy innocence. Anyway, get cozy and let's get into it, shall we? Years ago, me, my family, and some family friends would go camping at some cabins in Lake Placid, New York. Despite what happened that weekend, that campground still holds very fond memories that I will cherish forever. The incident happened 4th of July weekend. My family was grilling and my friends and I, who were children at the time, were running around playing cops and robbers. While we played, the campground owner approached my parents and offered to pay for some food. My parents, being friendly, gave him food and beer for free. Eventually, the owner overstayed his welcome, and my friend's dad asked him to leave. This angered him, and he took off his shirt, attempting to fight him. We were not aware that he was an alcoholic and already drunk when he asked for food and beer. Our parents eventually got him to leave, but he came back this time with a rifle. As my friends and I played, he walked around drunkenly and tried to load a rifle. One of my friends, being an innocent kid, walked over to him and asked him what he was doing. The owner said, "I'm going to show your dad something." One of the adults saw this and rushed over. My friend's dad took the rifle from his hands and threw it across the parking lot, then screamed at him that there were kids around. At this point, I knew something bad was happening and rushed all my friends inside our cabin. At this point, my dad called the police, recording the whole thing. The police eventually came and arrested him for the night, while the campground owner tried to claim he never had a rifle while saying on video, "Gimme my rifle." The police returned the following day and let us file a temporary restraining order while we stayed the weekend. While this is an incident my family laughs about from time to time, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if he had gotten that rifle loaded. So, to the campground owner, let's not meet. I'm a 36-year-old woman. When I was 26, I went through a life-altering, hope-crushing, has anyone seen my will to live kind of breakup. To save you from reading paragraphs of heartbreak, I will sum it up by saying that it would be more than 3 years before I got into another serious relationship, and that I probably would not have survived if my precious toddler girl hadn't needed her mama. About 2 months after the aforementioned breakup, some female friends invited me to the huge, old and beautiful house that the two of them rented for a July 4th bonfire and cookout. When I arrived at the house, they told me they had invited a guy friend who they wanted me to meet. I had seen his picture on one of their MySpace friends lists and commented that he was cute at some point before, but they promised there was no pressure. After all, I was mostly a raw and tragic mess at this point. In any case, the guy friend arrived and we were introduced. While he was not nearly as cute as his profile picture, he was funny and easy to talk to. Besides, I wasn't looking for anything, so whatever. I then learned that he was quite taken with how gorgeous I was, even though he chose to tell me that he had been, in his words, nervous because I could tell just looking at your profile picture that you have huge upper arms and I thought you might be a beast. He was quite the charmer, obviously. We hung out that night, and when he asked for my number, I gave it to him because he seemed a decent enough person. Fast forward 2 weeks or so, we've talked a little through text and instant messenger, and have hung out with our mutual friends a handful of times. I make it very clear that I'm in no fit state for a relationship and can't do that if that's what he's after. He says he understands, but that he enjoys my company. Fair enough. One night, after we'd been out with our group at our usual bar restaurant, I agreed to go back to his place with him. We hang out, have sex like consenting adults, and go to sleep. No big deal. The next morning, we're just hanging out and chatting a bit before I head home. At some point, he says, "You know, you're a really heavy sleeper." My initial reaction is to chuckle and agree that yes, I do indeed sleep like the dead. Then I catch something sort of odd in his tone that I can't put my finger on. I say, "Wait, what do you mean?" He stumbles over his words and says, "Oh, I just honestly thought you were pretending to be asleep because you were making these little noises like you were enjoying yourself." I felt like someone had poured ice water down my spine and was momentarily speechless before I said, "What did you do to me?" He blanched at my tone and quickly said, "Nothing really. I mean, once I realized you were really asleep, I stopped." He refused to elaborate on that statement, but I felt absolutely sickened. In the following months, he would text me obsessively and send me messages on MySpace at all hours of the night, telling me things like, "Have fun getting laid, cunt." Apparently, this all stemmed from his inability to understand why I didn't want to be his girlfriend or see him anymore. He started flirting with my friends in an attempt to make me jealous. He even started trying to chat up the 15-year-old sister of my best friend, except that his flirtation devolved into saying he hated her because she reminded him of me. Ultimately, his batshit behavior only stopped when one of my friends, who he said had pretty eyes but called disgusting because of her weight, responded positively to his advances. They're still married, as far as I know. I contacted him about 5 years ago to apologize for any pain I might have caused him. He ended up making inappropriate comments on my Facebook pictures in the middle of the night and picking weird petty fights with my fiancée in the comments. Even though he is married to a psychiatrist, his actions make it abundantly clear that growth and rational behavior still aren't his strong suits. I now live 700 miles from where I first met him. I moved back to my hometown 2 years ago. Unfortunately, I learned about a year ago that he now lives in the same state. Thinking about him still makes my skin crawl. I live in fear of him realizing that I'm a relatively short drive away, and I hope, on all that is sacred, that we never meet again. This happened a year ago. I live in New Mexico, and sometimes I have to drive to Texas for business. I'd always enjoyed driving around the state. Lots of wide open spaces between the pockets of civilization dotting the landscape. Right before the 4th of July, I got a call to go to Texas on business. I'd made that drive several times before. Roughly 2 hours of it goes through a very empty stretch of highway that doesn't have anything beyond a tiny little town, complete with a post office, gas station, mom and pop store connected to it, and a few trailers that look abandoned. One of those blink and you'll miss it places. I would usually stop in there for coffee and a bathroom break whenever I had to make that particular drive, and this morning was no different. I spotted the gas pumps and store in the distance and pulled off the highway into their tiny gravel parking lot on the south side of the store. The layout of the place is the pumps are in front, the store behind them, and there's a small parking lot for customers on the south side, a dirt road running past the north side of the store, and a parking lot in back that I'd glimpsed before when driving by that usually had a few cars, presumably belonging to whoever worked there. This is important to the story, bear with me. Anyways, I pulled into the parking lot on the south side, which was empty. I remember thinking this was a good thing because usually the place was packed and I was in a bit of a hurry. For a moment I wondered if they were closed, but I'd been there on that same day of the week plenty of times, and their neon sign "We're open" was lit up, so I got out of the car. My first clue that something wasn't right was when I nearly tripped over a small stack of beer cans. The parking lot was, in fact, sprinkled with the type of trash one sees from parties: chip bags, food wrappers, disposable cups, and lots of beer cans. I thought that was strange because the place was neat and clean every other time I'd been, to the point of near OCD. The pumps and the entrance to the store looked as shiny as ever, so I told myself it was probably just they'd had a 4th of July party there, and no one had cleaned up yet. I started to walk towards the store, but about halfway there, something made me stop and look around. I got a powerful sensation of being watched, but didn't see anyone. In fact, I realized that was part of the problem. The whole place felt deserted and still. I didn't remember it being so dead any other time I'd been there, especially on a weekday morning. For a moment I wavered. Should I go up to the door to check it out or walk back to my car and forget the whole thing? I'm sort of paranoid as it is, and something about the whole thing just felt off. But then the lure of coffee, they had good coffee, and a bathroom made me push that uneasiness aside, and I kept walking forward. I was nearly to the door when I heard the unmistakable crunch of gravel under tires coming from the north side of the store, just out of my line of sight. The noise startled me because it was so quiet that the sound may as well have been a gunshot going off. Dead silent 1 minute, then that sound a truck makes when you push it to start on a gravel road and it's rolling forward. I was pretty sure I heard footsteps briefly as well. The hair stood up on my arms, and I decided I'd had it. I was noping out of there. I had maybe 5 feet left to get to my car when this big-ass black pickup truck with 2 guys in it rolled out far enough beyond the wall where I could see them. Mind you, they weren't on the dirt road, which would have made sense, but right up against the side of the store itself. I saw them staring at the front door when the one in the passenger seat caught sight of me and said something to the driver, pointing to me. They looked surprised, as if they'd been expecting me to be at the door or inside by now. Something else to note. The north side of the building is much closer to the store's entrance than the south end. When they saw me backing away back to my vehicle, only then did they start up the engine of their truck. I waved, hoping that they were friendly, but instead I got nothing but cold stares, not friendly nor hostile, just staring at me while the one in the passenger seat kept talking to the driver who wasn't moving. At that point, I dropped all pretense of not being scared. I bolted the rest of the way for my car, jumping in, then locking the doors before pulling out a knife I carried in my glove compartment for self-defense. There were only a few abandoned trailers nearby. The post office was up the road and so tiny that it wouldn't be shelter anyways, even if a mail carrier was in there. If they decided to come after me, I had nowhere and no one to run to, and the nearest town was over an hour away. I started the car up, backed up, and moved to pull out onto the highway, quietly freaking out because I was in a car that likely would not be able to outrun or outmaneuver them if they decided to come after me. I paused at the highway entrance to see what they were doing, and my heart sank. They'd also pulled up to the highway as if to get on it, but they were just sitting there, not moving, even though they could have pulled out before me and been well on their way since they didn't have to back up and turn around first like I had. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I spotted an 18-wheeler coming down the highway towards us, going my direction. No sight has ever been more welcome than that beautiful shiny rig. The guys were so intent on watching me that I don't think they saw it in time to plan a counter-move to what I did next. I waited until it was close to them, but still with enough distance to get in front of the rig without causing him to slam on his brakes, and then I peeled out on the highway. I looked back in the mirror, and they were still sitting there, with the driver now flipping me the bird. But they didn't follow, quite possibly since they knew there was now at least one other vehicle on the road that could come to my aid if needed. After that, I didn't let off the gas until I hit the next town. I called the state patrol for that area to file a report for suspicious activity, and they told me the gas station and store had been closed for a couple of months. They said they'd check it out, but I never heard back. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I had just kept going up to that door. If I had, I'd have been either in the store if the door was unlocked or right at the door, where they'd have easily been able to jump out and block any escape or chase me down before I could get to my car. It felt like I'd escaped a near ambush, and to this day, I hate to think what might have happened if I'd been paying less attention. That incident and a few others are why I got my CCW shortly after that. A couple years ago, during the summer after my junior year of high school, my friends went to the beach to see the 4th of July fireworks. A bit of background information. I lived a county away from my friends and wasn't familiar with the area around that beach, and only one friend, Shelby, lived anywhere near the beach. The others lived much further inland. None of us could drive, so we walked several miles to the town beach from Shelby's house before the fireworks and made our way back in the late evening around 10 o'clock. There's a certain distance from the beach where the crowd from the fireworks always disperses as they make their way down side streets at around the point where the major shops in the town are. Still, we had to keep following the straight road through the centre of the town to get back to Shelby's house. The streets were pretty empty at that point, with only a few stragglers and the occasional cop at a bustling intersection. There were 4 of us, Shelby, Amber, Hannah and myself, walking in rows of 2 with our arms linked together. We had had a pretty good time and were still feeling kinda giddy and goofy. Hannah was my partner, and Shelby and Amber were walking behind us. We were on a bit of a stretch of road with no side streets, with a bunch of smaller shops, fast food joints, gas stations, etc., where everything was closed due to the holiday and the late hour. A group of a few men, around their late 20s or early 30s, stood on the sidewalk outside an empty gas station. They didn't move to get off the path when they saw us walking toward them, which I thought was odd. It was a holiday, though, and they were quite obviously drunk, so we stepped slightly into the street to walk around them. One man grabbed Hannah's arm while we were trying to pass by and asked if she had a cigarette. None of my friends smoked then, so we very honestly said no and continued walking once Hannah pulled her arm away. The man was tall and fairly well built, and we're all pretty short, so we were a little startled, but we didn't think much of it as we walked down the street. We even made a few jokey comments about it when we were far enough away from the station. Several minutes later, Amber and Shelby fell a bit behind because one of Amber's crappy flip-flops slipped off her foot. Hannah and I didn't notice and kept walking. The next thing we knew, Shelby and Amber were leaning over our shoulders and whispering that the man from the station who asked Hannah for a cigarette was following us a few yards back, without any of his friends in tow. We were all a little freaked out at this point, but we decided that it was possible that he just happened to be going in the same direction, so we picked up the pace and continued down the street. At this point, some intersections started appearing every few blocks or so we switched to the other side of the street at one and kept going. We thought that we probably had nothing to worry about anymore until Amber looked over her shoulder at the next intersection and saw the guy on the same side of the street as us again. We switched once more, and he switched with us, but the third time we switched, the man didn't. Instead, he kept walking on the other side of the street. A bit after the intersection, a big commercial truck was parked on our side that blocked the view of most of the street in front of us. Something didn't feel right, so I made everyone hang back a few seconds and we stopped a couple yards away from the truck. Lo and behold, the gas station guy crossed in front of the truck and headed down the side street next to it, between two shops already closed for the evening. Shelby started swearing, and we turned around and ran back to the intersection and down the street that intersected the street we had been walking on. We were only an empty train parking lot away from Shelby's house then, so we ran full tilt down the street and through the lot as she explained that the side street he walked into wasn't a real street, just a dead-end alley between two restaurants. Nobody familiar with the area would walk down there on purpose, but it would be the perfect place to go if you wanted to get the jump on somebody walking by. So, creepy gas station guy who followed 4 teenagers on foot for almost a mile. Let's not meet. So this happened in early July, and it still creeps me out today. I'm a soldier and live in the barracks on base since I'm unmarried and can't afford my own place. For security reasons, I will not name the base or its location. Aside from the common parties on the weekends, it is typically pretty quiet around here, so this event surprised me. Additionally, I work the night shift 4 days a week from 2 to midnight, so it is even quieter on most days when I return to my room. This night, however, was on a 4th of July weekend. Military members get 4-day weekends on federal holidays, so the common area was a bit louder on Thursday night when I returned. The barracks are separated into 4 3-story buildings with a large concrete common area. Since we obviously can't smoke in our rooms, the common areas have 2 smoking areas, which we call smoke pits, on either side. Each smoke pit consists of a picnic table, a grill, and a large trash bin, all covered by an awning to block the rain. The pits are the site of most parties that occur on the weekends, mainly the furthest one from my building. I had left work early, so it was about 10 when I got to the barracks. As per usual on nights that don't have work days following them, there was a party at the pit furthest from my building where most of the people outside were at. However, there was one person at my building's pit. Initially, I assumed he was just out there to smoke and wasn't up for the partying. What was strange, however, was that he had no lit cigarette, no vape, and wasn't on his phone. He just sat there, dressed in blue jeans and a red hoodie with his hood up. It was the middle of July in the south, so this was a bit strange, but the rooms are perpetually cold during the summer, so I figured he might have stepped out to warm up. He sat on the table with his arms in his front pocket and his head hanging. Wanting to smoke, I stood at the opposite side of the table and lit a cigarette. The guy didn't speak or even move the entire time I was there. He just sat there, blankly staring into his lap. I didn't think much of it and just went to my room, changed, and patrolled YouTube for a while. It's important to note a few things here. Each room houses 2 soldiers, and the doors automatically lock when closed. The only people with the key are the unit headquarters and the room's residents. In the event that a resident loses their key, they have to call to get someone to unlock it every time they need to get into the room until the key is replaced. Additionally, my room is located on the second floor of the building. It's a bit tucked away around the back, so unlike the rest of the building, there is no traffic outside my room. Lastly, my side of the room has the only window and the door, so I can hear the rare occasions when someone does pass my room. Finally, my roommate worked an odd shift from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., and I wasn't too sure what days he worked. Also, the room is very dark and I cannot see if he is asleep when I first enter. So I close the door quietly by keeping the knob turned as it closes. This is important. He wasn't home at this time. At around 2 a.m., I hunkered down to get some sleep. Before I dozed off, however, I could hear a shuffling outside. I peeked out the window and saw an obviously drunk girl tripping over herself to get to her room. I knew the girl lived in the room next to mine, so I didn't see a need to help her since she was literally right there. But I listened for a while until I heard her enter her room. About 10 minutes later, I heard someone walking towards my door and stop. I figured it was my roommate getting home, but I couldn't hear the obvious sound of someone unlocking the door. For a long moment, it was silent. Then I heard the sound of my door slowly opening. Instantly, I sat up and looked at the foot of my bed where the door was. There was no sound of the doorknob turning nor a click of the lock. The door was slowly being pushed open as if someone was trying to enter very quietly, which wasn't like my roommate. After the door was fully open, someone not in uniform walked in. At first, I didn't recognize who it was until I noticed the red hoodie. I gasped and screamed, "Get the fuck out!" The man jumped and darted out of the room. I jumped out of bed and ran to the door, but by the time I made it, the guy jumped over the rail and into the bushes below, then ran across the common area. Immediately, I called the MPs and they arrived within minutes. A few of them searched the area, while the rest made trips around the rooms to check on everyone. The door of the girl next door's room was also not closed. They eventually found the guy in a storage room of another one of the barracks buildings. A few weeks passed until I found out the whole story. Apparently the guy wasn't even a soldier, but was an ex of the girl who lived next to me. Before that night, the ex didn't know what room she lived in, and attempted to follow her to her room after she had finished partying. He knew she didn't have a roommate at the time, so he figured he'd be able to prey on her without anyone noticing. I don't know how the guy got onto base since there are always ID checks at the gate, and the guy didn't even have identification. Fortunately for the girl, in my attempt to be quiet, I had accidentally not closed my door completely, and the guy mistook my room for hers. What's worse is that the girl had not closed her door all the way either, so had the guy not mixed up the rooms, he'd have broken into hers while she was extremely drunk and likely unconscious. While I'm fortunate that the girl was safe, I fear what might have happened had I been asleep when that creep was in my room. Typically, the barracks are supposed to be safe places for troops to sleep, and things of this nature don't typically happen. But this goes to show you need to be careful no matter where you are. So, creepy civilian in the red hoodie, let's not meet again. I've tried to write this story for over a year now. Maybe I'll finally hit post this time. 22 years ago, I was 11 years old. Growing up, I was taught to always respect adults, especially when in someone else's home. I was the youngest of three. My dad frequently travelled on business, and my mum was usually busy working or driving the older two siblings to whatever they had going on. This meant I spent a lot of time in other people's homes. I was always friendly and polite and enjoyed speaking to adults. I was also an extremely nervous kid and tried my best to hide it. My mum was very emotionally abusive to me, and I believed her when she blamed my being a horrible child for her abusive actions. Therefore, I was constantly in fear that someone would find out just how truly awful I really was. My approach to life at 11 years old was, be polite, never make waves, and don't piss off mum. It was the week of the 4th of July, and a girl I went to school with, Leah, invited me and another girl, Carla, over to swim in her pool and spend the night. I'd known both girls for about 5 or 6 years, but had only recently become close friends. My mum dropped me off and gave me the usual, have fun, don't embarrass me. I remember having so much fun the whole day. I was young for my grade, so while I was still 11, Leah and Carla were 12. They flirted with boys and even wore bras. I was a tomboy and flat as the floor. Leah and Carla were cool. We had the best time together. At night, we did girly things like talk about boys and play with makeup. It was so different from my typical summer night hangouts playing capture the flag with the neighbourhood boys. The next morning we were still giggling and having fun. Leah asked her mum if Carla and I could spend the night again. She said yes, and we jumped around with excitement. It was the 4th of July, and Leah's dad was coming back from wherever he had been the night before, and with fireworks. A bit later, Leah's dad, who I'll call LD, pulled into the driveway. I had never met Leah's dad before. He stepped out of the car wearing cut-off jean shorts and no shirt, smoking a cigarette. His hair was straggly and greasy. Leah said, "Hey, Dad," and he replied, "Who is this?" while looking at me. I introduced myself and he walked inside. Leah's mum told us to pick things up around the house because they were having some people over. We did as she asked, but I remember noticing a shift in the overall vibe of the house. I was familiar with this, as my mum could change the feeling in our house from warm and happy to ice cold and spiteful in a blink of an eye. Typically, some sort of yelling accompanied the shift in my house, though. It was different at Leah's, as everyone appeared to be going on as usual. A couple hours later, we went outside with LD. He had an enormous slingshot thing that he had made in the garage. He asked me if I wanted to see what it did. Sure. He put a potato in it and launched it into a field across the street. He asked if I wanted to try it. Really? Yeah. I would never be allowed to do this at home, so of course I took him up on it. Leah and Carla wanted to try it too. He gave a quick sure and walked away to grab another beer. Once they were finished, he asked if I'd like him to show me some cool tricks he could do with the slingshot. He addressed me directly by name. He did not ask Leah or Carla. This felt weird, but I smiled and wanted to keep being polite since he was an adult and I was in his home. Friends of Leah's parents started to trickle in. Leah, Carla and I went back and forth between playing in the pool and the garage. Every time we went back to the garage, LD would ask me lots of questions and comment on how cool I was. He asked me if I had a boyfriend yet and if I had started wearing a bra like Leah. Leah chuckled and said, "Stop talking about my bra, geez." I smiled and tried to hide how uncomfortable I felt. A few minutes later, a man arrived with his daughter. This guy, who I'll call Dude, was LD's best friend. LD began calling my name, motioning me to come over. "Dude, this is Leah's friend. She is really cool and she loves our slingshot." LD and Dude built it together. Dude said, "Oh yeah? Hi, Leah's friend." And I said, "Hi, nice to meet you." As the night continued, it felt like every time Leah, Carla and I were near LD and Dude, they had something to ask me or tell me. Leah and Carla didn't seem to think this was weird or even notice. It was now dark, the fireworks were done, and I was getting tired of conversing with LD and Dude. They smelled like cigarettes and they put their arms around my shoulders several times. I didn't like them touching me, but I never said anything. I acted like everything was fine and just laughed it off. I suggested we go back to Leah's room to play this game we had played a few times over the last couple of days. Finally, we were away from them. Then LD and Dude came into Leah's room and said we should come outside to the bonfire for s'mores. They also had another brilliant idea for us. We should sleep in the camper tonight. Leah's family had a camper at the very end of the backyard, right next to the bonfire. Leah and Carla loved this idea, but it made me feel sick. I didn't want to spoil any fun, and I didn't want to offend LD or Dude. They were adults, and it was still LD's house, so I had to be nice. But all I wanted to do was run away from both of them. We walked out to the backyard carrying blankets and pillows. Dude walked up to us and said his daughter wanted to join us in the camper tonight. Dude's daughter, who I'll call DD, was 10, only a year or so younger than me, but she was smaller and acted much younger. She was timid and quiet. When she did speak, it was like baby speak. LD and Dude were getting more drunk by the minute. After getting set up in the camper, DD asked me to take her back to the house to go to the bathroom. I had just met DD a few hours before, but she seemed to cling to me. When we were walking back to the house, about half a football field from the camper, DD grabbed my hand while we were walking. She asked if she could sleep next to me in the camper. "Sure," I said. On the way back from the bathroom, DD grabbed my hand again and held it tightly the entire way back as she sucked her thumb. She clung to me and asked me again if I would sleep beside her. This made me even more nervous. I just wanted to run away. We all got situated in the camper, and Leah, Carla, and DD were asleep quickly. LD and Dude were joined by another guy whose voice I didn't recognize. All three were right outside the camper sitting by the bonfire. They were drunk and loud. Something was so wrong about this situation. My heart was racing, and I was praying and begging God to help me make it through the night. Suddenly they were quiet. I felt the camper moving, the door was opening. It was LD. He whispered, "Anon, hey, Anon." My back was turned toward him and I pretended to be asleep. I didn't move, I didn't answer, I just waited. After a few minutes, he went back outside. I heard him say, "She's asleep." Dude told him, "Just wake her up. Tell her we have something to show her." A few minutes later, LD returned and started whispering my name again. When he went back outside, LD told them I wasn't waking up. The third guy told him to shake me. Thankfully, I positioned myself furthest from the door on an upper bunk with DD next to me. Leah and Carla happily took the bottom beds, which blocked any way of reaching me or DD. LD and Dude came into the camper several more times after that, but didn't say anything. After a while, they passed out around the fire. I thought that night would never end, but eventually it did. When we finally exited the camper, we returned to the house and I called my mum to pick me up. It was like nothing had ever happened. I literally felt crazy the next day. I was surrounded by people, yet no one noticed. I questioned myself and the entire experience for years. What if I was just being paranoid? What if I had interpreted the whole night completely wrong? Leah and I quickly drifted apart. I never went back to her house and I never told anyone what happened that night. To add additional context, when I was about 3 or 4, my parents vacationed out of the country. My siblings and I were left with a family my mum supposedly knew through a friend. While my siblings were at school during the day, I stayed back. The dad was just like LD, but I could not escape him, and things did not end the way they did in the camper. When I was at Leah's, I knew something was wrong because I felt the same way as I did then. DD's behaviour only confirmed my fears. I wish I would have said something comforting to DD in the moment, or hugged her to keep her safe, but I didn't. I didn't say much of anything. I did have her sleep next to me on the top bunk, but that's about it. A couple of years before this story took place, when I was 9, I mentioned what happened when they were on vacation. My mum completely shot me down. She said there was no way that happened. She said I would have tried to fight him off and would never let anyone touch me. Her response made me believe it had been my fault, and I let it happen. I also learned I couldn't rely on her for support. The morning she picked me up from Leah's, I knew she wouldn't believe me, or worse, she'd have blamed me. I later learned that this was her way of escaping responsibility. Over 10 years later, during a visit to my parents, my mum was going on about all the gossip she'd heard recently. I was half listening when she mentioned, "That girl Leah from grade school, do you remember her? Her father had been in the local paper a few months earlier. He had been arrested and charged with sexual molestation of a minor. Apparently, there had been other claims a couple of years prior to his arrest, but nothing came of them. I had no interest in knowing anything more about him or the outcome. I knew in my heart what he and his friends had in mind that night, but I worried about offending someone or how it would look if I asked to leave. I didn't want Leah to be hurt or embarrassed, so I pretended to be oblivious to her dad's blatantly disgusting behaviour. I still hate it when someone tries to put their arm on top of my shoulder. Do you have scary stories you'd like to hear told? Send me an email at nocturnalreveries@proton.me. I will be sure to credit you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more tales, both true and imagined. Until we meet again, I've been Basil, and you've been lovely. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Good night.